You can hear gunshots like just ringing out through the school, and like you're just wondering like which one of those is going to be somebody that you're like best friends with or somebody that you love.
Our community still grieving and in disbelief right now after a 14-year-old gunman opened fire inside Apalachee High School, killing 2 students and 2 teachers in Barrow County. And the investigation far from over. We expect to get more updates throughout the day from the Barrow County Sheriff and the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. Sarah Hammond reports from the Gainesville Regional Youth Detention Center where the suspected shooter is being
There
held.
are a lot of moving parts in this investigation, but one big piece is that the suspect is in custody. 14-year-old Colt Gray is being held here at the Gainesville Regional Youth Detention Center. Now, investigators say he used an AR platform-style weapon when he began shooting. He's charged with murder and he will be tried as an adult. At this time, investigators say they don't believe Gray was specifically targeting the 4 victims. What we still don't know is why he opened fire. Investigators say they are still looking into a motive, and Barrow County Sheriff Judge Smith credits school resource officers with taking the gunman into custody. But this is not the only time Gray has been linked to a school shooting threat, according to the FBI. They say last year he made online threats. He was interviewed, but the FBI says there was no probable cause to arrest him at the time. And this was understandably a terrifying moment for these students and teachers, wondering if they knew someone who was hurt or killed.
I was listening and you could hear gunshots like just ringing out through the school, and like you're just wondering like which one of those is going to be somebody that you're like best friends with or somebody that you love. And it's like just really like a terrifying thing.
Schools in Barrow County are closed for the rest of the week, and we anticipate getting some more details from the GBI a little later today as they continue to work through what happened. At the Gainesville Regional Youth Detention Center, I'm Sarah Hammond for Atlanta News First.
And joining us now live here in our studio is attorney Josh Schiffer, your criminal defense attorney, and of course you also spent time as a prosecutor. A lot to unpack here because, as Sarah just explained, this suspect is due in court tomorrow and is actually going to be tried as an adult. We're talking about a 14-year-old. So first of all, Josh, what does it take for a 14-year-old to be tried as an adult?
Well, in Georgia, we have this specific law. It's oftentimes called SB 440. It involves basically the 7 most serious charges that automatically create a presumption that the state can proceed against someone who would otherwise be considered a juvenile and try them as an adult. And as we heard from the current head of the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, that is the intent of law enforcement right now, even though that final determination will be made by the Barrow County District Attorney's Office. That office will be tasked with determining exactly how the charging process proceeds against this young person, but everybody is expecting it to be a traditional adult-style prosecution with the same consequences any other adult would face in Georgia.
Yeah, you know, I mean, there's so many legal issues to unpack here, and one of the issues that I want to ask you about is, well, there's frankly a lot of anger among some of the parents that we've interviewed because apparently there was a call made to Apalachee High School yesterday morning, just hours before this shooting happened. It had been made to Apalachee High School administrators, warning of a potential threat. And apparently GBI is now confirming that the threat was investigated and then it was dismissed. So it seems that there might be some potential legal issues to explore there.
There's a lot going on as this story continues to unfold. What we know absolutely now is that the young man was investigated due to some complaints involving some shooting allegations, school shooting. There was actually a visit by the local sheriffs to his family back in 2023. And during that visit, the family basically told law enforcement, hey, he doesn't have access to any of these firearms unless he's supervised. Now, obviously, I was a teenager, and so were most people. That's not really a strong protection in my mind, but there was that prior issue. Then we have this phone call immediately preceding yesterday's terrible events. How that call was treated, what happened? Was it dismissed just matter-of-factly? Was it one of many? Was it a unique incident? Those are all parts of the story that I can't wait to figure out exactly what happened, because it will give us an insight as to who is responsible and what we can do to prevent these kinds of terrible events in the future.
Yeah, and you mentioned that 2023 threat. So apparently, Colt Gray was investigated, now 14 years old, was investigated in 2023 for allegedly making online threats to commit a school shooting. At the time, he was 13 years old. He was interviewed alongside his father, and Gray denied having posted the threats, and apparently there was no probable cause for an arrest, according to the FBI. So what is the standard for probable cause? Why was it not met? Why wasn't he arrested then and there?
There's going to be a lot of investigation into that interaction, because it would have been the first opportunity for law enforcement to take action against a potential future threat. The way that I understand it is the threats were very clean. They were open. They were unambiguous. And the source of those threats was tracked electronically, because this was done through a game system directly to this address. So while the state did have a lot of information, they made the choice, and that's local law enforcement, to not pursue this further. And I believe there will be a review over how that process took place. As I've worked with law enforcement for decades, I can understand the assignment for those officers that day. Hey, there's a kid that said some stuff online, go check it out. And it would be a pretty reasonable drive-by interview with the family. Hey, I'm Officer Josh. We got this report. What's up? And guess what? Teenage kids say all kinds of horrific things.
And you don't arrest them just for the silly things that teenagers say.
Exactly. If we were going to hold law enforcement to that standard, we'd run out of jails immediately.
That's right.
It would be inopportune to do that. But how that process took place definitely deserves some investigation and consideration by the general public.
Okay, now I do want to ask you about something that, I want to just tread lightly here, because I don't want to insinuate anything. But let me just start by showing some footage. That is the mother and the father of Ethan Crumbley. This is a completely separate case, to be very clear. This is, Ethan Crumbley he is a young man in Michigan who was convicted and is now spending life in prison for killing 4 students and injuring 6 others and a teacher at a Michigan school where he was in school. And this year, for the first time ever, parents of a mass school shooter were not only convicted, but they were sentenced to prison. So this is the Crumbley parents. They were sentenced to more than 10 years in prison for involuntary manslaughter. So my question to you, and again, I want to tread very carefully. We're talking about a separate case here in Georgia. Let's get back to the situation here in Georgia, where apparently, allegedly, there was an investigation into what happened in 2023. And some questioning involving the father of Colt Gray.
Absolutely, and that case is a new analog for these kind of incidents. Never before the Crumbley case had a family ever been investigated and then prosecuted, eventually convicted, of crimes associated with allowing the school shooter, the juvenile, access to firearms. However, Michigan took the lead nationally. This is a highly watched case because it's almost a conviction for failure to prevent a future crime, and that makes a lot of civil libertarians, such as myself, very nervous.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there's a distinct need for law enforcement to be able to address the conditions that allow some sort of horrific event such as this, and that's going to include specifically access to firearms, failure for parents to do the right thing, whatever that is, when they see incoming problems. That's a really difficult and novel legal position.
Yeah.
Anybody that's raised children, the number one rule, they're unpredictable. You know what they are generally doing, but certainly at any one moment with the hormones and brain development of youths, they are very unpredictable, and that's why we consider them incompetent in most criminal settings. However, when we get to these major issues, specifically causing serious bodily harm or death, that's when the state steps in, and they are going to treat Mr. Gray as an adult. They're going to prosecute him aggressively, and I believe if there is information developed and the facts to support it, there may be consideration of an additional set of charges against the parents or anybody else that was involved in allowing this young person access to a firearm to the degree where he was able to bring it to school.
Yes.
And that's really the big crux right now. everyone's very interested in, how did the firearm enter the school?
Yes.
Was this in a vehicle? Was this in a book bag? Were there metal detectors? Were there other security protocols that were or were not followed? Because everything we're hearing about the resource officers is that the moment they learned that an incident was happening, they responded immediately, and the young man was placed into custody without further incident.
So, and you mentioned the school resource officers, and actually I do want to just show their images. And we were here are the school resource officers who were involved. And like you say, I mean, we have heard from state and county officials praising the quick reaction of the Apalachee High School resource officers. We've learned that those two officers who you saw confronted the gunman. But I do want to point out that you know, some parents and students, or one parent in particular who spoke on camera to our Sean Gables, and here some of the victims, you know, they were understandably upset because they said that the students had not been told about the call, had not been told about a call made to the Apalachee High School administrators warning of a potential threat, that GBI confirms the threat was investigated and dismissed. So a lot of questions there, and I do think it's worth pointing out that there's this body of law that is really developed surrounding the responsibility of school resource officers, law enforcement in general. We saw that a Florida sheriff's deputy was charged but then later acquitted for failure to act during the Parkland massacre, and we saw that in the Uvalde case, 2 former police officers were charged with child endangerment as well as abandonment in you know, what is widely considered a botched police response. And again, that's not what we're insinuating whatsoever in this case.
It's an absolutely novel part of the law, something that we really didn't consider 10 or 20 years ago, but with the repetition of these school-related shootings, there's a good question: what obligations does a school system have towards the safety and security of their students? First of all, in virtually every state of the union, and definitely Georgia, it's almost impossible to sue a school district in civil court, which is the general remedy that society uses to encourage more protection. Think about stores or other retail places, theme parks. Lawyers suing them means that the parks and other organizations create safety protocols. That doesn't happen in schools. Schools are basically immune from lawsuit. So the school boards are the ones devising the security in response to the world as it develops. And there's a variety of different levels of security. There are schools where the security is basically non-existent outside someone at a front desk. And then there are schools which are basically locked down with very significant security, individual searches. There's all kinds of different levels that schools consider.
Yeah.
That conversation is going to be big because passing on liability to the individual actors is much easier than suing the actual school district.
Right,
and it will be important to see how and why the community and legal system respond to the obligations of the adults protecting our children.
Josh Schiffer, I cannot thank you enough for your insight, your analysis, as not only a criminal defense attorney, but a former prosecutor and a parent. You know, it's really heartbreaking to have to cover this, and you know, I just want our viewers to know we're on top of this, every angle of this. If you haven't done so yet, I really encourage our viewers to download our free Atlanta News First mobile news app, and you can get updates sent right to your phone. We have extensive coverage. Josh, as we've been saying, this story continues to develop with the suspected shooter facing a judge tomorrow.
And this is something that every parent thinks about every day. I got an email on Tuesday for my teenage child indicating that they were doing an active shooter drill, and I commented that just having that drill is such a huge difference and potentially traumatic for kids these days. So it's very important that we all watch how this story develops.
Traumatic, but unfortunately, clearly necessary. Yeah. Thank you so much again to Josh. And again, if you haven't done so, please download our free app to get updates sent right to your phone. Thanks for joining us.